with the Club Shay Shay
Yeah.
interview. That's where we're kicking off this week's podcast. Some of you have seen it by now, some of you haven't. For those who don't know, for those unaware, Shannon Sharp's become one of the big figures in media generally, and what started as him being a co-host of Skip Bayless on Undisputed. Now we've got his podcast at Ocho, and you got Nightcap, and now you got this one as well, the Club Shay Shay podcast. This one's Shannon's venture in entertainment. In this case, in this edition, pal, he interviewed John Cena. We all know Cena in this realm of the world, in his like wrestling ventures, and whether he's seen as the GOAT, whether he's up there, he's effectively like a top 5, top 10 all-time wrestler, no matter where you put him. Cena's doing his retirement tour next year, but he goes in this interview with Shannon Sharp. You watched it, I watched it. Few takeaways, pal. I guess I'll just firstly ask you overall thoughts on the interview itself, because normally we don't react to like every time a wrestler goes on Impulsive, every time an ex-wrestler goes on Club Shay Shay, like Ric Flair went on Club Shay Shay a couple of months ago. We don't react per se to everyone, but we found this one interesting. So I think it's worth discussing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was a good interview. It was nothing really like groundbreaking. You could tell Shannon Sharp, you could tell he's not too familiar with the wrestling world. He was visibly reading from notes. And you could tell when he was like mentioning wrestlers, like he probably had little to no knowledge of who he was talking about. Like CM Punks and Dominic Mysterio, guys like that, Drew McIntyre. And but overall, it felt like I don't know, maybe I'm just different because I do so much research for my Wrestling Uncovered channel. Like I knew about Cena being homeless and living in his car, living in the gym, taking showers in the gym he worked at, stuff like that. And Cena's talked about this stuff a lot recently too. I think it was with Kevin Hart. But what I did find interesting about this in particular was when Cena did talk about WWE. What he did say I thought was fascinating. In particular, him crowning Roman Reigns the GOAT. Now that's something I don't think he's said before. I could be wrong. I don't think he said that before in any prior interviews. That kind of stood out to me. And it kind of got my wheels turning. And it was like, like The Rock gets killed for this stuff, right? When The Rock is like robotic, generic, company guy answers. And Cena does the same thing and everybody loves him for it. Like if The Rock had said, oh, Roman Reigns is the GOAT, Roman Reigns is the best because of the stock price, everybody would be like, this is Dwayne Johnson, just lies, pal. This is Dwayne feeding his ego, feeding his family's ego. But Cena gets up there and Cena literally said Roman is the GOAT because of how he's affected WWE's stock price as the top star. Like that was Cena's literal reasoning behind this. Now that's interesting to say. And I think he gives Roman, I think he may have gave Roman Reigns a little too much credit for what's going on in WWE right now. Roman, he's not there all the time. He's not the one that's driving storylines, especially over the summer. He wasn't there at all. He came back at SummerSlam. Roman Reigns is not driving storylines. The guys and girls that are driving storylines are Liv Morgan, Dominic Mysterio, Cody, Solo Sikoa. I think it's more of a WWE management thing, personally. I found that interesting. But what do you have to say about that? About just the Roman GOAT and all that stuff?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. My take on it, I find it a really interesting perspective. I guess, as you say, it's the company line. It's saying what, I guess the WWE brass, like this is like the lines they want regurgitated when asked about the GOAT. Because, the TKO board, the WWE board, if Cena's asked about the GOAT, you can't say Hogan, because obviously everything that comes with Hogan, you can't say him. You can't say, well, some do say Ric Flair, but there's obviously Ric Flair has his own lot of stuff, whatever. And then guys like Austin, even though, you have Austin as the GOAT last time I checked and we discussed this, that even Steve Austin has some stuff, which they're like, so let's not mention him. So usually your answers are limited to, The Rock or, Roman Reigns gets a mention here, or The Undertaker. He's still on good terms with the company, pal. I find it interesting. It's the perspective that the guy who's, I guess, the current consensus best guy is the GOAT because he's, I guess, been handed the torch from the previous generations, if that makes sense. Like, that's seen as logic. Is that, okay, yeah, you had Flair, or then you had Hogan, or have whichever order you want to do it. Then you had, let's say, Shawn, and then Shawn and Brett. Then you had Austin, and then Austin and Rock, and then you have guys like Undertaker, but then you really had Cena, and then Cena passed torch to Roman as like the guy and whatever, and then I guess is that going to make Cody the GOAT in like a year or two, and he's been officially the top guy for like 3-4 years, and then they're going to pass the GOAT status to Bron Breakker. Is that how it works? Like I found it interesting, like Cena, the way he was describing it. Yep, Roman came in and he was, right away in the main event as part of the Shield, and then he's been in the public eye and in like the main spot, through fanfare or negative fanfare for 11, 12 years. And Shannon Sharp's like, okay, yep, yep. I was like, okay, Shannon, cool. Cena's like, yeah, he didn't, because Cena's like, oh, myself, I, really had to climb the rungs, and I did, putting himself down, praising Roman. Roman came in as the main eventer. It's like, okay, sure, you're not wrong, but like, obviously Shannon, as you say, Shannon's hardly, wrestling guru, wrestling purist, JD from NY, one of us there to be like, well, yeah, okay, sure, John, but like, Shannon's like, okay, yep. So yeah, I found that interesting, but no, I want to ask you about that because, when it comes to the GOATs, I mean, this is wrestling. Wrestling's its own caper. It's not like any other sport. You couldn't apply this logic in sports. You couldn't say, okay, the current best player in the world is Luka Doncic. He's the GOAT because he has been handed the torch from generations previous. He's received the torch from MJ, who then gave it to Kobe, who gave it to Melo Anthony in New York for a year, pal. No, who then gave it to, LeBron, who gave it to Curry or whatever, who gave it to Luka. Like, it doesn't work that way in the NBA.
Right.
It doesn't work that way in any other sport. But in wrestling, I guess that's Cena's logic. What do you think?
Yeah, and for one, Cena did say that it's subjective, and it's his opinion, and it's who he thinks is the best. And he also gave his Mount Rushmore for rappers too, which was interesting. Very interesting Mount Rushmore there. That's a whole different discussion, but it was funny. He didn't want to say himself, and of course he wouldn't. And I think Shannon Sharp had pointed out that Ric Flair said Shawn Michaels is the GOAT, and somebody else that said Flair was the GOAT. I don't remember. He had interviewed two other. Oh, Triple H. Triple H said Flair was the GOAT when he interviewed Triple H. So with those things out of the way, you're looking at, like, I don't know. It's interesting. Let's just do quickly. Let's do a footnotes version of Roman's GOAT case, right? Mm-hmm. So Roman, if you want to, let's compare him to Steve Austin, right? Some of the pros over Steve Austin. He had a longer career, a better match catalog, and maybe that's it. Like storylines, the Bloodline and Austin McMahon storyline are right there neck and neck. Roman, I mean, Austin probably has a better WrestleMania legacy. But Roman has had, we did this already. Roman has had one great WrestleMania match. 2, if you want to count 39. If you want to stretch it and count 37, he's had 3 great WrestleMania matches. Austin has a better WrestleMania legacy. Like I said, Roman's been around longer, but Austin also wrestled for like 15 years. He just didn't do it at the top like Roman did, which is impressive for Cena to say that, because Cena was saying, hey, I started at the bottom. I was in developmental for a few years. I was on the indie scene before that. I almost got fired. It took me a while to get to the top. Roman came in and was on top. So that's impressive in its own right. Then if you're talking like Roman versus Hogan, I mean, it's kind of things we said already. Roman has better matches, but that was like the 80s. So Hogan is more famous. Hogan's a bigger star. Then like really the interesting one is Roman and Cena, really, to compare those two. When you look at it, they're very similar, very polarizing. I don't know. It's interesting. So where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on where Roman sits now? I know we had Roman at like 18 or 16, something like that. Is he top 10 now, all time?
I think he is. Just on...
Yeah, I think so too.
That 2020 to really WrestleMania 40 time, who knows what they can do in the next year or two, that as a standalone is going to put him like top 10 all time just about. With where wrestling, as we've discussed, with where wrestling was, especially like the dark years in the 2010s, and Roman was the beacon of hope for about a year and a half, 2 years, carrying the company by himself before Triple H took over, and then the wheels got turning. Then he could really, he sold the Bloodline story and the Sami Zayn stuff, and the mega long run as champion, which changed the landscape of wrestling as a whole. Like, I think like that align, because Roman's so complicated. Roman's so convoluted. We've discussed this. Everyone knows this. He's 2014 to about 2018, where it's just like, bro, no one wants this. This is so bad. This is Lex Luger in 1993, 94. No one's asking for this. Just why? Like that, but then you mix in like a 3-4 year period, which I reckon, as we've discussed, historically for wrestling, Roman's 2020 to 2024, historically with like legacy in that, is going to be like viewed on the same echelon as like Austin's Attitude Era in like 98, 99,
Yeah.
Hogan's 84, 85, 86, 87. That sort of, importance for so it's a hard one. I don't think Roman's ever going to be a legitimate consensus, like Mount Rushmore GOAT guy, like within the eyes of most people. Because like for me, I'll say, yeah, Roman should be Mount Rushmore. He's done whatever. But the general Joe Blow, I don't think they're just gonna say, well, Roman's 2014, 2018 disqualifies him. I don't care what he did. Like it was that bad. And most people are gonna say I view Undertaker, Ric Flair, Hogan, Austin, Cena. If they're probably gonna say the first four, and then people for the more modern are gonna say Cena, Roman. They're gonna have those guys in there. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a good debate though. I think it's great. It's a whole podcast series in itself. Like, Wrestling YouTube's made videos on this and tried to cover this whole topic in 20, 25 minutes. It's a really hard one to discuss all of it. But yeah, so that's the GOAT portion, pal. Anything else on that?
Well, I want to ask you this, just quick question. Has Roman surpassed guys like Triple H, Randy Orton, Macho Man, those kind of guys that are like in that, 8 to 12, 13 range? At Kurt Angle, Brock, has he surpassed those guys? I mean, if he's top 10, he'd have to pass those guys. Good.
I was even a guy like Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
Around that. It's really tricky though, because Triple H, unbelievable body of work when you look at it from 96, 97 through until really, he probably retired in the late 2010s, but he was still having big time WrestleMania matches in the late 2010s. So I'm like 20 plus year consistent quality body of work. And you're comparing that to a guy who Roman's 3 to 4 year block at the start of the 2020s. Many people say saved wrestling or led to this like a boom now or like a reboot. So it's how you assess it. It's the same things like with Steve Austin and like Austin versus The Undertaker almost. Like Steve Austin was let's say, like 96 to let's call it, so 96, 99, let's say 3 years. Then you've got let's say 2 years in the early 2000s. So you got about 5 years really. But that 5 years puts him above, like in many people's eyes, a guy, The Undertaker, who did 30 years of consistent quality stuff. So it's really tricky to assessing wrestling is really hard because you can't assess championships because it's written down.
Right.
It's not like you can say he won 6 chips, he won 4. F the guy who won 4. He lost 6 times in the finals. You'd rather not make the finals than make the finals. Haha. So it's a bit different to the NBA, for instance. But yeah, as you say, I think it just depends how you qualify those years that Roman was just objectively not good.
Right.
How much stock you put into that versus how much stock you put into him saving wrestling. What do you think?
It's a fascinating topic. I think most of the stock goes into the impressive periods. I think it is. I think Roman's 2020 to 2024 is more impressive than Cena's peak. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Cena's peak drove just as many people away as it brought in. Cena changed. I've talked about this. Cena changed the wrestling audience from like teenagers and young college kids to families. So it was a trade-off. Roman has brought people back. That haven't watched wrestling in years, in 10 plus years. Roman is making wrestling cool again for young people and older people and the people that were disenfranchised. So that's impressive. Just say that. I mean, his peak rivals Hogan's peak, I think, and Austin's peak. I don't think there's been bigger peaks, and I think that's the most important stock is when a guy is at the absolute tippy top and is doing it better and bigger than everyone else. I think that is one of, if not the biggest scaled away for a guy in their GOAT case in wrestling. Because like you said, you can write anybody's name on a piece of paper, give them a prop. CM Punk had the prop for 2.5 years. Was that 2.5 years as important for business as Roman's 2.5, 3 years with the belt was? No.
Pal, and another thing on the GOAT debate, I'll compare it to the NBA again. Roman's a lot like LeBron. I mean, many people have compared Cena to LeBron. Really, with Roman, for a lot of people, like, LeBron's big disqualifying moment was the 2011 finals versus Dallas where he went missing.
Yeah.
And people, regardless of how great what he's done since, how big the peak was, how for literally like a decade straight, he was clearly the best player in the NBA, LeBron, people just say, nah, not even hearing a GOAT debate because he did that. It was that bad. He had a meltdown against Boston. He had a meltdown against the Mavericks in the 2011 finals. People just rule him out. With Roman, it's very similar because, yeah, like when you look at LeBron, for instance, LeBron's about 2015 to about 2020 is like the best all-round basketball player you'll ever see. 2018 especially is the absolute peak, or 2016. It's just unbelievable. People disqualify him because of stuff that came before. Roman's similar in my eyes. Like his, as I said, 2014 to 18, in many people's eyes, don't care. The guys who did it in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, just clear. They never did stuff like that. They never had that sort of meltdown. I don't even want to hear about Roman Reigns. Yes, what he's doing now is good. Sure, I'll acknowledge it. But don't even consider him on the same level as Austin. Not on the same level as The Rock. Not on the same level as Undertaker, Flair. Maybe Cena. Cena killed wrestling, whatever. Like, that's how some of these people view it. And I understand their point of view. But, yeah, to me, it's like, it's all wrestling. It's so subjective, wrestling. Cena said it himself. Shannon was like, yep. Shannon agreed with Cena on this one. It's so subjective. You can't compare rings. You can't compare championship wins, WrestleMania main events. You talk about Mania main events, pal. Roman's the GOAT. Him and Hogan. Because Roman's main event of 8 WrestleManias. It's gonna be probably 9 next year when he faces The Rock. And he might end up at 10 the year after. Like this will be like the most decorated wrestler ever alongside Randy Orton. And it's like, well, okay, great, but
Exactly. Yeah. So, anything else from Cena's interview with Shannon that you want to touch on?
Look, like that discussion about Roman is really the big thing I wanted to discuss on our podcast, because the rest of it's, Cena's views on entertainment, his views on rap, Cena's up, his rise. Like, most of us as listeners know that. We've watched Slew Kick Studios video, like, the rise of John Cena, and you've covered Cena's career a bunch in your videos. Most people know Cena's story, so nothing overly new, groundbreaking to discuss there. Anything else you think?
Yeah, I just thought it was hilarious that he bought a fake Lambo. I was like,
yeah,
like, of course, like,
like, bro, okay. Thanks, John. Thank you for that.